folks. Welcome to the next edition of Serverless Craic. We are working through the book, The Value Flywheel Effect. How are we getting on, gentlemen? All good?
You're good.
Good,
Oh,
good,
good.
good.
Getting after it. Getting
Getting
after it.
after it. So we were just on chapter three there. Chapter four is kind of like it's an example of orderly mapping. I think it's okay. It's like a conversation between two people doing a map. It's worth a look. I mean, there's no point really talking about it because it's kind of you really need to sort of read through it. But we thought we'd jump into chapter five, which is the start of the four phases. So the first phase is of the flywheel is clarity of purpose. And chapter five is really about finding your North Star. So and it kind of focuses on the North Star framework. And it's a cracking framework. I think Mark, you were the first to kind of catch your eye. That were probably about 6 years ago, I think, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
I think it's from John Cutler and the guys in Amplitude. They put out a lot of great material around the North Star framework and caught our eye. And especially when you're trying to find easy ways of sort of trying to get people to coalesce behind some sort of mission or purpose. It's a really nice visual, collaborative sort of tool that we've used extensively to sort of get that clarity of purpose and help
Yeah.
sort of guide teams towards, well, what are you trying to achieve? And do you have any metrics for that? And well, what do you do if something changes? Is it reflected? So there's a whole process and technique that the North Star framework guides you through that, which is super valuable.
The big thing I thought, I mean, at the time, I think we were probably like as architects working with lots of teams, and you drop into a team who'd be like, who would have disappeared in a rabbit hole. They're like 10 layers deep, and you're just going like, I think when you understand the tech, you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like they're like, oh, we're doing this. And you're like, oh my God. But the nice thing I think about it is the whole idea of it's kind of like a sort of an arrow, and it's your North Star is at the end, which is the thing you're kind of it's your one kind of meaningful metric, and that will then maybe lead to something that's maybe 2, 3 years out. And then it's like what's the things feeding into that. And what was really nice about that is it introduced the concept of leading metrics and lagging metrics.
Yeah.
And often when the CEO stands up and says, we're going to sell 1 million t-shirts, that's a lagging metric.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't tell you, oh, by the way, this is a lagging metric, but you need to work out, okay, for us to sell 1 million t-shirts, I need to do this. That's your leading metric. That's a metric that you can actually move. So I think getting teams to, almost reverse engineer a leading metric from a lagging metric is really what the North Star is.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
super helpful.
I always thought it was really useful in, I know like, you'd be thinking in sort of terms of one team or like small startup style sort of organizations. I always used to think North Star was brilliant at the enterprise level, where you've got this, like a large amount of squads and you're kind of working on like an enterprise space and then you trying to understand your meaning, like in the overall big picture. And I used to kind of assemble like a North Stars across multiple different squads to say, right, well, this team's kind of attacking this kind of leading measure and this is aimed at driving this impact. And then these teams are kind of going after these sorts of things. So you could link it. What I loved about it was you could kind of link it back to the work. So like you could link those lead measures back to teams. But then same thing, you could then work your way from the teams through the lead measures up to the North through the North Star out to the actual, money in the bank,
Yeah.
which I thought was really kind of are we all does everyone know their, so it was really good communication sort of
Yeah.
thing for me as well. So I love the structure of it. The
Yeah.
structure of the North Star is very powerful.
Totally
Yeah.
agree. And I think there's nothing better for team morale and individual morale that you know that your work has meaning. And the
Yeah.
North Star was great to tie what you're doing today, that line of code you're writing, or that thing you're just deploying today. How does it actually relate to the objectives of your team, and how do those sort of metrics and KPIs, how do they relate to the objectives of your division or your department or your org, and all the way up to your company's overall strategy and sort of key sort
Yeah.
of objectives, right? And making that visible and making that accessible to the individual little junior developer on your team writing code is a superpower. It really does accelerate, delivery and that's like we talk about clarity of purpose, right? It helps everybody understand what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Well,
Yeah. I think
it's the whole Dan Pink thing, mastery, autonomy, and sense of purpose. that is purpose, and if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, forget about it.
Yep.
It is kind of like, I'm not going to call it a map, but it's very complementary to that. Like, so we talk about like mapping for strategy and stuff like that. But I've certainly leveraged North Star for getting in the unfamiliar areas to really kind of narrow down on where the value is,
Yeah.
right? And they kind of focus sort of conversation and understanding around value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do are we even is leadership even clear on how they're articulating like
It,
value?
it's
Can
always
we
a
look
so it's
at
always
that?
a fascinating exercise to go in and ask teams what are your metrics?
Yeah.
What are the metrics that you're sort of talk about or leveraging or you think you're aligned to, and do you know them, and are they important, and how is the work you're doing influencing them? And it's usually a great conversation with the team because they might be saying, "Oh, we have all these metrics, but we're not quite sure what they're for or who's using them or what they're actually influencing." And
Yeah.
it's usually a really involved conversation, really valuable conversation to figure out how the team's being measured on any of these things.
Very value oriented.
Yeah.
I kind of really like it for that. Very good.
Mm. It's also the importance of measurement. You know, Grace Hopper quote, one accurate measurement is better than a thousand expert opinions.
Yep.
And what it's getting is like, what are we actually measuring? And this is the important thing. It's extremely powerful. It just
Mm.
gets all the hyperbole and bluff out of the way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it does help for teams advocating for change or advocating for trying to push barriers that if you can come armed with data and clear your alignment to your overall organizational strategy, you'll go a lot further than, hey, we just want to do this cool thing. But if you come armed
Yeah.
with, well, here's the company strategy and here's the company's key KPIs and metrics, and here's how our team are influencing them, that's a much easier conversation than, hey, we want to do this cool thing.
Yeah. Also, a word of warning through North Star. It's a bit like the Emperor's New Clothes. Sometimes the process can actually point out that the Emperor has no clothes on. So sometimes you actually point out maybe that somebody doesn't know what they're doing, and that can be often very dangerous. So you need
Yeah.
to be a bit careful.
You find out your North Stars that turn up and knock out Jira tickets. That's
Yeah.
that can be problematic.
Well, I
Yeah.
think I mean that, and on that, typically how that happens is because in order to have a structured North Star, you kind of have to go digging around. Well, where's the profit? Like everything boils down to money in the bank, right? Or whatever that business value is. And so, like, really, what you start to notice is when there isn't a good grasp of that, sometimes you notice, well, that's the stuff that we're doing out here on the left, the work, it's just it's labeled in the North Star is it's not connected, or it's not directly connected, or there's other things we could be doing to have way more of an impact on that North Star, which then should result in more
Yeah.
business
Yeah,
value. Right? So you're absolutely right, Dave. I've encountered that scenario a handful of
Yeah.
times,
It's
but it's
all
good as well as corrective, right? You
That's
can
it. I mean, yeah, if you're in the right organization, it will be productive. And I mean, remember before we used to North Star, we used to do impact mapping, which is very similar. It's like, what do you need to do to make an impact? And I often think there's a bunch of these techniques related to clarity of purpose. And what they actually do is they help you create a compelling narrative. It's like let's like what's the story of what we're all doing? Because you want to be able to. It's the old thing. If you meet someone, it's like an elevator pitch. You meet someone at a lift, and they go, "What are you working on?" And you go, "Blah."
yeah,
So do you have that in your head? And
mm,
often, especially software developers, you don't because you're like, I do tickets or
yeah.
I write code, and that's a sign that people don't know what this whole their mission or their purpose. It's
Yeah.
important.
I think
Uh,
and what we find is it's sometimes easier to craft the North Star and align it for the product aligned teams or the teams that are more customer facing. It's sometimes a bit more challenging when you're doing behind the scenes or platform teams or enablement teams. So it can be sometimes challenging, but I think the North Star framework really helps tie that. Say you're on a developer platform enablement team or you're on some sort of platform team delivering capabilities, you need to make sure that you line up the value you're delivering with the actual goals and the business value that the teams that are leveraging your stuff are actually delivering. And so
yeah,
it can help with that, those type of conversations. Oh, why do we need a platform team? Well, it enables all of our product teams to deliver more value to our customers, and you can make that linkage much more clearly with the North Star framework.
yeah, big time. And the other thing that I think is kind of interesting as well. I think as we were doing that and getting great success, I remember then Amazon started to release how they worked.
Yeah.
with their working backwards process, and I certainly picked up on a whole bunch of similarities with that process, and it's really just design thinking, if you want to call it that. I don't like that phrase, but I remember trying for ages to figure out how working backwards actually worked, and get into a couple of early sessions when they were starting to share it. And then the guys wrote the book. Was it Bill
Yeah.
Carr wrote the book, which is brilliant. So it is it's almost like don't start with step one, step two, step three. Go right forward to what the customer needs and what it's going to be like when their need is solved, and then work backwards from that.
Yeah.
And that's where their whole press release process comes from, which I again loved. But that's the other thing. If you don't understand the purpose, you can't write a press release of this is the story of the end state.
Yeah.
So they're all really powerful techniques.
Yeah. And they're all enablers of critical thinking as well, right? They're all there to challenge you and challenge your thinking, challenge your team's thinking, and sometimes challenge your organizational thinking as well. It's like, do we know what this is? Oh, who can we ask? Oh, they don't know either. Can we go ask somebody else? So it's a really great way of instilling a lot of critical thinking into your teams.
Mm.
I think it's I think things like North Star and Wordly maps are very complementary to the working backwards kind of ethos, right? So if you can kind of perform those sorts of things, you can write a compelling 6-pager, right? And kind of add structure to that, and kind of hypothesis, and and you've got a good idea where you want to be, right?
Mm.
So I think they are
Very
very
good.
complementary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
writing that press release is a lot easier when you have your North Star metrics and your key input metrics all defined. You can line up the work that the team are doing to all of those things. It becomes a lot easier to write a press release that sounds accurate or is accurate or
Yeah.
that is a good
Yeah.
one.
That's an interesting one. So that's that. That's so that I mean that's it. For me, the value flywheel effect starts with clarity of purpose. If you don't know what that is, and that's that combined business and technology clarity of purpose, it's very hard to make progress. I mean that's your foundation of everything. I think it's extremely important. But the one thing I would say, you need leadership, you need courage to do it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's a hard road, but it's an important road.
Yeah.
So that's the crack. Anyway, that's chapter 5. We'll keep going on flying through the book. It's actually interesting to see what we actually wrote.
I know.
So give us a look on at Serverless Edge on Twitter and on the YouTube channel, and serverlessedge.com. Thank you very much.
You do.
Carry on. Bye.
All right.